Hey everyone. So today we have a very interesting security panel with me today. We have Vlad from ZKsync and Rey from Coinbase. And the reason we're doing this panel is because last week, as most of you are aware of, there was a security incident where ByBit unfortunately lost 1.4 billion dollars in a multisig compromise. And as soon as we heard this, we wanted to set up a panel with some of the best uh, people when it comes to like multi-sig security. And I have Vlad and Rey, two very interesting people who will talk more about this. So let's maybe start with some round of introductions. My name is Hari. I'm one of the founders and the CEO of Cantina. I used to work at the Ethereum Foundation building Sorority Compiler before. And now we build a security company that work with customers end to end on security offerings, all the way from code reviews to bug bounties to multi-sig security. So with that in mind, let me just pass it off to Vlad from ZKsync. Vlad, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. Hey everyone, thank you for having me. And unfortunately, under such circumstances, it's never good when we going into such panels, especially after big events. It's a kind of big signal for us that something is going wrong. But we need to do it, and we need to talk about security in general, and spreading the information broadly for having the best practices and doing stuff. So a couple of words about me. I'm doing security stuff on ZKsync, mostly focusing on kind of internal review and also doing a bunch of stuff, everything that is related to security, and also as being in space for quite a long, touch multisigs for a bit for my personal stuff as well as for a company. Yeah, and it also includes like ops security and stuff. But yeah, we will talk about this a bit later.
Okay, amazing. Rey, do you want to go next?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. I'm Rey. I'm the engineering manager. My team is responsible for all of blockchain security at Coinbase. My background has been in security since my years in college, and then I got into blockchain in 2016 with Ethereum and running smart contracts and doing more and more security. So it's been a lot of fun. It's been a fun journey. I just want to preface that all my opinions are my own and not of my employer. So just want to make sure that everybody's clear on that. Thanks.
Okay, amazing. So let's start with a question right away to Rey. So Coinbase probably has the biggest target on the back when it comes to like anyone building in crypto. You probably are securing like 500, $600 billion worth of assets. And I want to know from Coinbase, how do you like manage security inside the company, especially given the fact that there's a big target on your back? Probably multiple nation states are trying to think about how to compromise your private keys, your wallets, your assets. Tell me at a high level, how is Coinbase thinking about like managing security when it comes to like all these assets and private keys that you're controlling?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Harry. Obviously, I can't go into any specific details, but security is primordial for Coinbase. And in fact, we have a team that's been working since last week, since the announcement, the ByBit hack, investigating it, and also reviewing over the weekend how we can improve our own security postures for any kinds of incidents like this or similar types of incidents. And our target is really going to be nation states, right? And as in the case of this particular attack, that's a level of target that we're looking to defend against. So we have a team that looks at all the existing hacks that happen outside, and then that propagates down to teams like my team that goes and investigates how we're securing our systems and what we can do from a postmortem. So we're doing our own postmortem. And of course, one of the things we're doing is making sure that we're good players in the industry. We want to make sure that this industry thrives. And with the event of these types of hacks, it's just bad press for the industry in general, right? It doesn't create a lot of safety or that the population, that the consumers would feel comfortable with. And so in any position, any way we can, we would be good actors and try to help ByBit recover their funds within the means that we can do that.
Okay, I will get back to you in a second. I especially want to understand like what, you as someone who sees all these hacks can advise other people on how they should handle multi-sig security, which is like the topic of the discussion. But before getting there, I think I especially want to hear from Vlad, because I think ZKsync is like one L2 that I've really thought about like multi-sig security in a very serious manner before it, became popular. Vlad, do you want to talk about all the effort that went into your team while building the Security Council multisig?
Right. So the way how we think about security on ZKsync, we want to do isolation and separation. The way how it's implemented is that we currently want to secure the whole network, and the way the layer 2 works is that you will need to build really fast. You will need to iterate, and you will need to do some upgrades from time to time, at least to even adopt some Ethereum upgrades. And because of that, we will need to do some maintenance. So the way we implemented this very, very initially, maybe it was 2019, as far as I remember, starting on ZKsync Lite, which is really kind of simple blockchain from perspectives that we see it right now, and probably it's not as complicated as all of the technologies that we are building today. But even so, we would need to start with the cutting edge zero-knowledge circuits and stuff, and making upgrades as smooth as possible, but also reacted to security incidents. So we had this trade-off. We will need to have something in place in order to react really fast. At the same time, we will need to be secure and make sure that everything that our multisig members will sign will be double-checked, triple-checked. There will be some other security measurements in place. So we come up with a security council, which is basically a multisig with various different people from the industry. And what is really differentiates Security Council from other multisig is that these people are really into crypto, and they understand the differences, and they do understand what they're signing. So we can provide some complex call data for them, and they will do their own investigations. They will never sign transaction, that doesn't make sense, or will provide any back. And yeah, so talking about Security Council, it's a kind of decentralization of the multisig. We don't want to keep it in place only on our company, but also we want to involve other people from the industry. That's the way it works. And yeah, on ERA, we do the same, basically starting, growing Security Council into concepts that people adopt on various layer 2s. And so today, we not only inviting people to join Security Council, but also different companies. And then you have a multisig out of multisig, where different people with different SLAs can be participating in the multisig signing. So that's the way we implement this. But it also includes a lot of stuff that is going off-chain, and the way how people signing transaction, and the way how they look into call data, simulation and stuff. So this is more into specification of the concrete part of the implementation.
I want to double down on something Vlad just said, which is, if you look at multisig historically in crypto, it has been something that people wanted to use to create trust. For example, like people don't really like multisigs in crypto. They want everything to be trustless. But the reality of most projects is that they're not at the stage where they can completely be trustless. There are like roles or actors in a protocol that have to be trusted. But in the past, in crypto, the signers of the multisigs were people that are popular on Twitter, people that you can like rely on, people that are like celebrities in Twitter. But we're getting to a point where, as Rey just said, the biggest threat vector is nation states. And unfortunately, these people on Twitter, people that are celebrities, they're not prepared to handle nation state attacks or compromises. So I bought Vlad here because I think they were one of the few teams when it comes to L2s that seriously put effort into making sure that the people that are signing off these important upgrades are people that can actually make sure that these are correct. And on top of that, these are people that have better OpSec than an average person in crypto, or even like a highly technical person in crypto. So very interesting to see how ZKsync is like managing this. Instead of having celebrities on your multisig, get security people who understand what they're doing on your multisig. That's like, one big shift in how they're doing it. So let me go back to Rey here in a second. Okay, let's just start by saying like what can people who are multisig signers do to better secure the multisig they're signing? And I want to like categorize this into like 3 categories. One is like, I know people who use multisigs on their individual wallets. They use like a consumer multisig. They still use like a safe or something like that, but they control their like personal wallets with it. Maybe like a one-on-one multisig. Sometimes like 3 or 4, 3 out of like 5. I think Vitalik has a multisig where he stores a lot of his funds, and some of them are like his friends. So the first category of multisig users are like consumers who just maybe have a lot of money. Maybe they just want to make sure that their wallet is hardened. What would you recommend these signers? How can these signers make sure that their multisigs are safe without adding a lot of friction into their workflow? Like, Rey, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, sure. Happy to debate that a bit. So you talked about kind of one extreme, which is the consumer, more the small startup, and then there's the big enterprises, and the solution is gonna vary quite widely for that, right? So starting with the small startup or the individual who has a multi-sig, and we're talking about multi-sig, right? If we're just talking about hardware wallets, then slightly different. One I would say, and a simple solution, is get a separate laptop, get a separate machine where you do the signing process. Go ahead and use a hardware wallet, which is great because you want to make sure your private key is safe. That's one piece, but that's not the only piece that's missing. As shown by this ByBit hack, is the transaction signing process is where it got subverted, right? And so you want to use a separate laptop. It's locked down. You don't have all these Chromes. You're not doing your day-to-day type of activities because you don't want that laptop to get compromised. Because that's how they kind of got in. They're showing you a transaction that looks legitimate, but underneath the covers, they've changed it and it's a different transaction. So that's the number one. It's easy. You get cheap laptop for $100,000, and you just turn that on whenever you want to do a transaction. You got your hardware wallet, and you're done. And you try to do as minimum of those as possible. So that would be the first step that I would say. Of course, the other thing is when you're going through a signing process, the key thing to look at is the transaction. And if you have to get a bit of knowledge about that in terms of what the transaction looks, the transaction hash. You can also go to, if it's Ethereum, you can go to Etherscan and you can do the input data decoder to validate the transaction hash to make sure that all matches. Take the time to do that. The other piece you can do also, since it's a multi-sig, coordinate with the other signers, right? Say, hey, this is what I'm signing, this is what it's for, this is what I'm looking at. Have that communication with them, don't just blindly sign, right? Which is what this case was. It was a blind signing attempt. So I'll pause there for a second, unless you want to talk a little bit more about the other piece, but that would be my recommendations on the individual side.
Yeah, I think that's a great set of recommendation. I would also recommend, from just hearing anecdotes of people losing funds, I mean, this is not necessarily related to like private key security or like multi-sig security. You want to avoid assigning things when at the last moment, or when you feel like, okay, there's a rush to assign things. And this happens frequently in crypto because there's a lot of FOMO in the space. People are like, oh, there is an NFT drop. Let me just try to grab it before it's gone. This is often times when attackers try to like get you when you are not paying attention. And I know multiple people that are like, big in the space that have had money lost because they ended up getting FOMO'd into something and they signed something they shouldn't have signed. So very important when you're signing, especially on a high value account, that you're taking your time. If somebody's forcing you to sign something, whether it's, you're missing out on something, it's very likely that
it's a scam.
Yes, it's a scam. And it's very likely that you could feel like abused. And I just really want to stress the fact that there are people that are highly, highly technical. There are like core devs that have lost money because they got FOMO'd into like signing something. They saw an NFT drop. They saw these things. So one tip from my end is don't sign things if you're FOMO'd into signing. On that note, like Vlad, do you want to add something to our conversation?
Yeah, I think it's great. It makes a lot of sense, all of this recommendation. The only thing that I would add is that not every multisig is the same. And, when you're talking about multisig, probably you can spread it out into different purposes and different meanings, and even like different actions. So what we found on ZKsync is that some multisig have, more access that they need to have, and then some others probably need to have a higher threshold, more people involved. And some other is fine to have like 2 out of 4. And maybe 2 out of 5. So you can play with different multisig, and instead of having one multisig that will rule it all, you will be able to do it like in a separate one. And then you will have also like best of the two worlds, because you'll be secure for every critical actions, but also when you need to do it fast, you will be able to do it like every frequency, like every day you need to sign a transaction. But if you lose it, you don't really mind. So that's a piece of advice that I can provide. And as well, in addition to that, something that surprised me a lot is that, the more complicated cold data is, the harder it is to review. This is obvious, but when it comes to interacting with protocols and also making upgrades, whatnot, people usually overlook and stuff in the middle that is something hidden inside. So what I found really useful is to write intermediate contract, audit it with a couple of audit firm, and then when you will do a transaction on the multisig, you will have the simpler call data. And it's just harder to do a mistake. That's simple.
I 100% agree, and I feel like looking back into the ByBit case, if there were like additional layers of like, for example, this multisig, it had like one job, which is okay, send money to this people, receive money from this people. So if there was some way to like lock down what actions it could take, or at least like make it clear to the signers that okay, you're just sending money to these people today, nothing fancy. And I think doing things like that can really avoid like situations like last week where you ended up signing the wrong thing, and you probably should be just signing things to another contract, and it does all the simple actions that you do like on a weekly basis. So very good point from Vlad. So I want to talk about what advice both Ray and Vlad would give to startups and maybe like now bigger companies later. But before that, I want to just talk about the Radiant hack, and I think this is a hack that happened a while ago. No, not that while ago, but it's a hack that happened that really changed how startups started thinking about multisig security. So TLDR on the hack from my side is, they had a multisig. Radiant was a company building in DeFi, and each individual signer in the same team was compromised by similar threat actors. And this led to their multisig getting compromised and the team losing $50 million. And this was like a wake-up call for many teams in the space, and they've started taking this multisig security seriously. And I want to hear from maybe Ray, and after that from Vlad, on their take on the Radiant hack. I'm pretty sure Coinbase must have had an internal investigation into this thing. I don't know how much they can share, but I would like to hear from Ray on like if they had any takeaways after the Radiant hack.
Yeah, sure, Harry. The Radiant hack, so that happened, October 16th of last year, 2024. And basically what actually happened is that the attackers took advantage of a routine transaction, right? So it's one of those where you kind of have to like pay for gas, or you top out your hot wallet, for example, right? And so they were using a routine transaction. And so the signers were probably not, as vigilant and say, oh, it's a routine transaction. They just sign it once a week, every Wednesday or whatever. And so that's how they took advantage of it. So one thing and this was because it's a routine transaction, they didn't probably inspect the whole transaction payload carefully. So one thing to do in these kinds of situations, when you have a routine transaction, is write your own script that goes and verifies that the transaction, let's say, for example, you're just paying for gas, like you're increasing your gas, right? Write a script, or, probably it's better to just write a script. It shouldn't be too difficult to do that, where before you sign the transaction, you run through the script that verifies that nothing has changed in the transaction data structure except for the gas. All right, so there, you're not trying to like change, you're not trying to upgrade the smart contract, you're not trying to make a call in the smart contract. It's a routine transaction, so you know ahead of time what kind of transaction it should be and the data structure of that transaction should look like. And so run through that script to verify that it's only changing that, the gas or the value amount. So that would be one suggestion I would say for that. That's a fairly easy, solution to the problem there. And then the next thing would be if, this is a bit more in layers, defense is in layers, right? So you don't really want to have one single wallet with a ton of money in there, although, with big companies, you tend to have to do that for cold wallets. But if you can, especially for these transactions that are routine, you're going to top out from your cold wallet to your hot wallet. And so those are routine transactions where you can have a script to verify that, and you don't do them as frequently, so you can have a separate computer and do those transactions, for example. And then you do more of the day-to-day transactions with variable data structures. In that case, if you were to lose that hot wallet, yes, it would be painful, but it wouldn't be the end of it. You wouldn't be losing 1.4 billion, for example. So that would be my number one thing to recommend in that case. In the case of the Radiant, is the Radiant Capital, I believe? Radiant Capital hack, yeah.
Okay,
and then
that's
the other thing,
great advice. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, sorry. And then the other thing is, obviously, always verify the transaction. Like I said, you want to verify the transaction hash. I think Vlad kind of pointed out a little bit. I'm also guilty of this initially, where you just check the first bits of the transaction hash and the last bits of the transaction hash. You say, yep, they match. When a lot of times, you can have different transaction hashes where the two, the beginning and the end of the transaction hash looks the same, but you want to look through the middle as well. So that's going to be important. Manual reviewing the transaction payloads. Now, like you said, you want to have signers who are security minded, who would be looking for these things. Security is all about the details. So looking through the details is going to be important for that. And then, of course, all of the other, recommendations I gave, having a separate computer for this, all of those apply. That's it.
Okay, great advice. Vlad, I want to hear from you.
I really like the point about scripts and verifying the call data, but I just want to extend this. So you would probably want to use a monitoring, and broadly speaking, you just want to see what is happening with your multisig day to day, not even after the action happened, but on the middle of the action. So basically, you start getting signatures from multisig members, and you already want to know what they're signing, because usually what happens is not that key is leaked, it's not that someone has access to it, it can just make a transaction. Instead, someone just sending the message that's supposed to do one thing, but instead doing the another. And I think that monitoring and maybe making simulation of the transaction works great, but it only works in addition if you're really checking the call data, if you really do the due diligence, if you're really checking what stuff is happening in the transaction, and basically if you understand what is going on. So that's, boils down to the point, what is the purpose of the multisig? If it's a simple transfer or maybe something not as complex as maybe like a couple of kilobytes of call data that has a like different meaning on unverified contracts, then yes, it would be enough. But then when you have something really complex, you will need to make this all stuff together and also add the technical expertise. So yeah, I think this would work great.
Okay, amazing advice. And now I want to get into okay, there are multiple DeFi protocols and companies like that in crypto where they have access to a decent chunk of capital. It's not $1 billion, but it could be like $10 million. It could be like $50 million, just like Radiant. What advice would you give, Rey, to these companies? They're not consumers, like maybe they have $1 million in their multisig. These are real companies that maybe have like $10 to $50 million in their multisig. What would you advise these people on how to secure their multisig?
So these are bigger companies if you can. So in this case, try to avoid, or maybe limit the amount of third-party products that you're using, because that's where a lot of the attackers, they insert themselves in these third parties. I won't name names, but and then it gets, you get affected by that, right? So if you can minimize the surface area of attack, basically, right, from third parties, that's good. To just trusted ones. You really want to use trusted partners. That's going to be really important. I won't name names. They're really good, but there's one that's here present. So, and that's going to be really important to make sure that your supply chain is safe and secure. It's because that's, like I said, it's a vector of attack. And that would be, the better option. Or if you can, roll your own, have your own KMS system. So that's instead of using third party, you can use a KMS that you have your own. And again, security, I should never say roll your own security because that's always bad practice. But in some instances, you want to make sure that it's safe as much as possible. So that would be one advice I'd give there, in addition to like a lot of the ones that we talked about. Another one I would say is simulate the transaction before it actually is executed, right? Before it gets mined. So if you can simulate that, you can simulate that using Forge. You can do that would help you understand, the implications of what that transaction would do, if there's anything that's been added to it. What else can I suggest there? There's a lot more things to do, but I have to be careful as to what I say. I'll pause there, and please feel free to circle back with me. I'm sure I'll come up with more suggestions.
Yeah, I mean, I want to add maybe a couple of things here on this topic. So if you look at some of these hacks and how they happen, a lot of them started off with like a social engineering vector. A common social engineering vector is that these North Korean threat actors, they would go to your engineers and say that, hey, do you want to take this job with my company? We're gonna make this like really fancy offer, a lot of money, a lot of equity. Let's do an interview, and that's how we get started. And during the interview process, it's like any other interview, except for the fact that they would ask you to download a coding exam, and they would ask you to run npm install to install the packages. And this is such a common attack vector where oftentimes if you're a developer building or working for a company, it turns out that there are certain things that your laptop has that will allow you to compromise the company. So tell your developers, tell your engineers, tell your people in your team about these social engineering attacks. Tell them that if something looks too good to be true, like it probably is a malicious actor coming after you. Very common attack practice. I mean, attack vector, unfortunately. So it's a good idea always to have somebody in your company or get somebody from externally. Tell your team members, hey, these are the things that's happening in the industry, watch out for them. One other common attack vector we see is somebody would get an email from a fake DocuSign domain saying, hey, you're fired, here's your termination. And the goal of this email is to get them to panic and get them to do something that they otherwise wouldn't do. Imagine getting an email that's hey, you're terminated. Any person would immediately feel urge to click it. And this is the moment that you have to tell them, hey, why would I get an email about termination this way? That this doesn't look right. So I should probably check with the people in my team before I even click there. So people are going to try to do many things to come after you. Make sure your employees, your team members understand that these things are fake. To give one more example, I know multiple founders that had their voices cloned because they go to panels like these and there's a lot of data on their voice out on the internet. And you can now deepfake your voice, and your customers or employees may get get a call with your real voice telling them to do something they're not supposed to do. So this is something else to watch out for. Too many ways to compromise people out there. The best thing you can do is obviously like make sure that no individual person can compromise the system. But we're talking about practical things that rarely works. You also have to train up your employees, your friends sometimes. I know like investors that have their parents called with a deepfaked voice. So these are all real stories. Understand that it's not just about you as an individual working for a company, but your personal like friends, personal like family that people will go after to compromise.
Yeah, Hari, if I can just add on and give a little bit color to what you just said, which is absolutely spot on. These phishing attacks, they're very predominant. And to me, it's kind of second nature because I went through so many of these types of trainings when I was at JP Morgan Chase and Circle and now at Coinbase, that I don't even think about it as much, but it's just kind of crazy. Just to give you an idea, like I had on a Saturday, I had a text message that says your Coinbase account was hacked. And I said, oh, okay. And then like 10 minutes later, I got a phone call, a British accent, very polished, says, yes, I'm from Coinbase support, and we just want to make sure that your account hasn't been hacked. I'm like, oh. And I started to freak out a little bit. And here I am, a security expert or pretending to be a security expert. And I'm starting to freak out. It's like, yeah, your account has been hacked, but we want to assure you that everything is okay. I'm sending you an email with some information for you to. So he didn't even ask me for any details, and ask me for anything that would trigger, my spidey sense. And I said, well, I haven't received your email. It's like, oh, well, it's coming. It's on its way. It's like, well, I actually work at Coinbase. Why don't you send me a Slack message? And he says, oh, we're not allowed to have Slack. And I thought, okay, so then, but I was very careful. I said, okay, well, I'll inspect it when I get your email. So about 30 minutes later it passes, I still don't get the email. And I'm like, oh. So I hang up, of course. And I said, oh, you know what? He was trying to phish me. So immediately I went into my account, I changed, and he gave me some really detailed information. I changed my password, I changed my email address, I verified everything was locked down. I had, two-factor authentication. So one recommendation, this is kind of more for users, but also for corporates, is I always use I have different emails for different purposes. And so for anything that's banking related or crypto related, use a separate email. Never share that with anybody. It's only for that purpose. That's a good best practice in my opinion, because otherwise they'll find out about it. And never use it for email or any types of activities like that. So I just wanted to add a little bit of color.
That's a great anecdote. I think I love hearing anecdote like this. I think most users, they don't like generic advice. They want to hear stories of like how somebody almost got compromised and how they prevented it. On that topic as well, like because we're talking about companies, one problem I see many companies face is that they often have this exponential growth phase. And when exponential growth happens, you're not often prepared to like handle the responsibility. Like I often work with teams that are like 10, 20 people that suddenly have to manage billions of dollars worth of protocol. And in Web2, that rarely happens. You rarely build like a company that suddenly has access to $1 billion over 3 months. But in crypto, that is like a very common story. So this is something that a lot of attackers try to exploit, where if you're a young company that just like blew up for good, they will try to like find ways to like attack your company. So it's very important as you get successful as a protocol to really take security seriously, because these malicious actors are specifically targeting like younger companies that just had some success, because it's often like easy targets. With that said, Vlad, I want to hear from you. Like, what would you recommend to like companies that are managing maybe like tens of millions of dollars? What would you recommend them when it comes to like their security, their multisig, and anything related?
Yeah, I think we gave already a couple of good advices, and the only thing that you need to actually implement this stuff. And everyone knows that it's better to have a separate laptop when you're signing. It's better to have a hardware wallet. It's better to understand what you're signing. But if you don't do it, you don't do it. You don't get any benefits from that. I would say that for when you're just starting with the security and you want to kind of grow security in place, I would recommend to start thinking about mitigation of the issue. So one thing that happens a lot when you transfer money, for example, or you already signed the message that is wrong, is having a time lock. Very simple mechanism when instead of making the action in one step instantly, you would wait for 1 hour on one day and it will be executed. So in this way, at least even if you sign something wrong, you can have some time to think what you can do. Like you still have the keys, you can still do another transaction, you can cancel the first one, you can maybe figure out what to do with the protocol or with the money that is inside the multisig. So this is a very kind of simple thing to do, but I fairly don't see it on many protocols. And I think this is something that we need to adopt for the ecosystem as a standard instead of just having it in some specific places for people with this security mindset and trying to kind of prevent any situation. Yeah, I think this should be something normal.
I agree. I think time loss can really simplify a lot of issues. And even if you make a mistake, it allows you to correct it if you catch it, within X amount of hours or like X amount of days. So great idea. So for those people listening, feel free to ask questions on Twitter or like by joining the stream. We will take questions towards the end. But one key takeaway that I want to get here is that, first of all, if you're working for a company, like the corporate security is also become like your individual security is also like important for the corporate security. And this is where Rey mentioned about how picking the right vendors is sometimes extremely important. In the US and many countries, swim swapping is such a common thing. So we would recommend, using two different companies. One is like GoogleFi or Afani, even for your personal devices, because if you can compromise your personal computers, personal social media, it's very likely that your company's corporate accounts can also be like taken down, because the barrier between like personal life and crypto company business is like very, very thin in this industry. So make sure that you're working with correct vendors even in your personal life when it comes to security. So GoogleFi or Afani, if you have a SIM card in the US, try to look for something similar in other countries. It's very easy to get swim swapped if you know what you're doing. Like you just need to compromise an employee at the company by just telling them, "Hey, I'm this person," and I can just go to like AT&T and say that, "Hey, I'm Rey from Coinbase, and I lost my SIM card. Can you like help me get it back?" Sometimes you can just bribe them to give it to you. So make sure that you pick the right vendors. If you're a company as well, make sure that you pick the right vendors when you're picking, for example, like SaaS application. I've seen instances where oftentimes for a KYC vendor, they would pick like a vendor that's like upcoming startup. And oftentimes these companies don't have the right security controls in place, and they often end up losing your customer data. And in crypto, when you lose customer data, this can be like abused to do a lot of different things, which is exactly what Rey experienced, where somewhere along the line, Rey's data was compromised, but because this data was with some company, and this was used to like send targeted phishing attacks. So very important if you're a company to pick your vendors carefully. Personal security is also very important. With that in mind, let's talk about enterprise level multisig security. Okay, if you're a protocol now managing billions of dollars worth of assets, what do you do, Rey?
Yeah, so this is, again, defense in depth is in layers. So we have a very sophisticated system for signing transactions. It goes through multiple subsystems or components. One of the things we do that, and we don't just look at external threats, we also look at internal threats. As an employee who could have been, phished or was just malicious on their own. And so we want to be able to account for both situations. So as a transaction is initiated by a user until it actually gets committed to the blockchain, there are multiple subsystems or components that it goes through before it actually reaches the final stage. And then it has to be propagated back into our own ledger or internal systems. And the reason for being a fairly complicated system is because, one, it has to be able to scale. And second, we have multiple systems because, you know, we're not just dealing with a single blockchain, but multiple blockchains, Bitcoin, et cetera. And so you have to have certain levels of abstraction. So one thing to do is that, you know, you want to have an attestation, verify or sign or some kind of cryptographic signature that identifies what the user is attempting to do, what kind of transaction they want to do. And then at the moment, the signing or the commitment into the blockchain, that attestation or that intent is verified, so that no subsystem within that lifecycle flow, transaction flow, can be compromised. So if there was a compromise within the system, the overall system, that would be caught, right? Obviously, it would be great to do it every subsystem, but what we're trying to do is you're trying to limit the number of systems that are trusted versus the ones that are untrusted in your architecture. That's going to be important because if all the subsystems in your architecture requires being trusted, then targeting any of those could compromise the validity of that transaction, that user's transaction. So you want to limit that. And so it's basically zero trust security, right? You want to trust as minimum as possible of the components in your architecture. That's going to be really important in performing that. And then you want to have a very strong, like I said, KMS system, key management system. Vlad alluded to monitoring. That's going to be super critical. You know, you have to make sure that you monitor and that you can do alerting as quickly as possible. So if something were to go wrong, you want to be alerted as quickly as possible and be able to do damage control as quickly as possible. All right. So that's going to be critical. And then you have personnel, right? So you have people who have to do some verification. A lot of it is automated, but there's still going to be some aspects. You have signers. So there are good protocols in terms of best practices of what to do. I won't go into the details because it's proprietary, but you don't want to know, or you don't want anybody to know who the signers are because you don't want them to be targeted, right? And so you want to limit the number of people who can sign. You don't want to divulge that information. You want to make sure they have good best practices in terms of what they're doing. Training, you brought up training. That's going to be important for those signers as well. And a refresher to make sure how to validate the transaction hash and transaction payload. That's there. That's going to be really important. And then, of course, you have all the Web 2 security best practices. Because it's going to be, if it's on the cloud or if you have your own data center, you want to make sure you have physical security. That's best practices. Network security, OS security. You want to make sure that all of the libraries or modules, NPM modules that you're using are coming from a safe environment, that they've been validated, audited, and then you lock them down, right? You're just using them. You don't just keep downloading from the web anytime there's a new update. You want to take a snapshot, verify that, get that audited, and then you're going to use that for a period of time. Once there's an accumulation of new updates, then you download them, you get them audited, and then you refresh your build environment for that. And then the last piece, if you're writing smart contracts, if your organization's writing smart contracts, you want to have a strong process for how developers get these smart contracts deployed, because they're also using keys for getting these smart contract deployed. And in the case of like the ByBit it was the key to the smart contract that was deployed that got compromised, if I understood this correctly. And so you want to have those keys well secured and automated and out of the hands of the developer. They should not be on the developer's machine. They should not have access to the keys. And that is the case at Coinbase. Is like, nobody has access to they don't just plug in their hardware wallet into their laptop and sign things. That would not be good practice. And then you want to have good inventory management of not only the keys, but also what is everything that's signed, all the smart contracts that are signed. So you want to be able to track that. You want to be able to track who your signers are. Obviously, that would have to be confidential piece, and then track all of the what I used to have a VP who called the gold jewels of the company, basically. So you want to make sure you want to identify what those the jewels of the company are, and protect those and minimize the touch points to that. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I think this is phenomenal advice. I think this is like the kind of advice that you can only learn by being inside a company like Coinbase. Like the level of threat they're facing is like on a different order of magnitude than most other average companies out there. To put it into context, if you can compromise Coinbase similar to how ByBit was compromised, the loot here is like probably like more than $500 billion. So there is a huge incentive for like many individuals, many countries to go after an entity like Coinbase. And I want to I have like two follow-up questions to Rey. One is, I think you mentioned something about dependency management. And I think this is something a lot of big companies ignore. I want to hear your take on why that is important. How is it connected to like security? How is it connected to all this key management that we're talking about? You mentioned something about like NPM packages and how Coinbase manages them. Yeah, could you explain?
Yeah, so this is about the supply chain. This started with, I think, the SolarWind attack. That was a few years ago, and that's where people started realizing, oh my goodness, I haven't secured my supply chain, software supply chain, my SBOM, my software bill of materials. And so startups started popping up, offering solutions for that, and big companies were starting to, okay, let's figure out where all this is coming from, because up until then, people were just downloading software from the internet that any developer could contribute to, and so that caused panic really in the industry. And I'm not talking specifically Web3. I'm talking about Web2 panic. And so people were starting to scramble and trying to lock down and understand where their source code is coming from. So best practice, and this is, I'm not going to be vendor specific, is do an inventory of all the NPM packages or libraries that your code is using, whether it is code that you're writing in-house or open source software that you're licensing from a company, because companies also use open source. Third-party vendors also use open source products. So you want to have an idea of where that chain of code is coming from, where the origin is. Do an inventory of those. Make sure that it's searchable, right? So that if an attack happens, you can quickly search through your inventory list and say, okay, you know what? This piece of software that we've licensed from company X is vulnerable. We need to get a quick patch and contact the vendor. Or if it's code that was built in-house, we can be able to update that quickly. That's going to be really critical, and keeping that information up to date. It's particularly challenging in the blockchain space because smart contracts don't have a versioning per se. I mean, you could create your own versioning, but when it comes to third-party solutions, very difficult to do that. And so there are ways that we've done. One of them is you get a hash of the library itself, and that way, if it's been modified, then you know that it's no longer the same library, and so it has to be changed. But it's not an easy solution as it is in the Web2 space. But there are ways of doing it, of course, and so that's important. And we need to move the industry in that space, in that direction, to make sure that we minimize the risks of supply chain attacks. And just to give a bit of background, supply chain attacks is, the attacker would insert malicious code into the third party, the open source software, which then gets downloaded and gets embedded into commercial products or internal products. So that's it.
Yeah, that is scary. And One more question I have for you is, I know Coinbase have put a lot of work into custodying their assets and they offer a custody product as well. At what point should companies start thinking about, okay, it looks like, that it takes a lot of work for me to custody it. Can I just offload this effort into Coinbase? At what point should customers in crypto think about using Coinbase as a custody provider?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm probably not the best person to answer that question, but I would say anytime you feel uncomfortable having that amount of money in your own hands and not feeling safe about it, that would be time to do it. I think back of just a couple of weeks ago, I saw this announcement on Twitter from Plan B. And if you know Plan B, he likes to do projections of Bitcoin. And he said that he sold all of his Bitcoin and converted it into an ETF. And that was a bit controversial, but I thought back, you know what? If you don't feel safe holding your own funds yourself, then converting it or transferring over to an entity that you feel would be better at safeguarding your money is not a bad solution to doing that. So I would say use that same kind of analogy. Unless you feel like, if I were to lose everything today, would I be okay and still be able to function as a company organization? Then fine. But if you don't feel that's the case, then maybe it would be time to investigate Coinbase as a solution.
Yeah, for context, a lot of the ETF providers use Coinbase as their custody provider.
Exactly.
And at a certain level, you have to understand that, okay, maybe your organization may not be able to custody, billions of dollars worth of assets, or even millions of dollars worth of assets. And I think it's definitely worth thinking that, okay, I should maybe use a provider like Coinbase or other custody providers, and then let them figure out, how to secure that asset. It's not your concern anymore. Obviously, there are still things you need to worry about, but at least it's not going to be about, okay, what about the funds that are going to get stolen if I don't do things correctly? So definitely something you should consider. That is, I don't think many companies are thinking about that right now, but if you have a lot of assets that is in your company balance sheet, definitely consider moving it into a custody platform like Coinbase. So Vlad, what would you recommend to companies that are managing billions of dollars worth of assets? How would you recommend them manage these assets on a multisig or elsewhere?
Hopefully, I'm not a representative for the company that is holding $1 billion on their own hands. The way we want to enforce the security is from a different angle, from different perspective, and I can talk a bit about that, if that this is something related. Sure. So the thing is that personally, I would never want to hold the billions in my hands and don't want to secure them for any price, because I'm not convinced that even if you put all of the best effort that you can on the security, you would still be comfortable. You'll still be thinking about different attack vectors, and you will need to. It's just harder to do. So the way I want to secure it is to put a lot of isolations and put a lot of factors behind the money and attacker. So I want to think about mitigation plan, but also what will happen in the case the transaction is already created, or what will happen if this layer of protection is broken, and etc. Because of that, that's the architecture that we're building for ZKsync. That's what I was describing with the Security Council. So on the one hand, you will need to do upgrades from time to time and do integrations to transactions on a very fast pace. But on the other hand, you would put some protection layers like these time locks, or you would be able not only yourself create a transaction, but you will need to get a broader consensus, including decentralization of protocols, voting with tokens, or even if the token voters are agreed on the upgrade, you would still wait for the separate multisig as a guardian multisig, where they need to sign the transactions they agreed on the security, and Security Council that will verify. So the more you put into this process, and the more kind of verifiable and very independent sources you have, the better I think it is.
Okay, great advice. Okay, we have 4 minutes left. And I want to wrap this conversation by giving like one advice to people listening on security, whether it's individuals or like, companies. So starting with you, maybe Vlad, if there's like one takeaway or like one advice that people could start implementing today to improve their security, what would you tell them?
Honestly, I think you need to be very paranoid. Like, really, like you need to, be careful about everything that you're doing, about PDF files that you're downloading, about every meeting that you have with people, about information that you're sharing, but also like, on stuff that sounds like day-to-day actions, but it's not. It can be something can go wrong on the implementation of the contracts, on the maybe even like Uniswap. You're thinking like they put $1 million into security of the network, but even there something can go wrong, like compiler issue, something unpredictable, some black swan. So this is the advice that I have. Everything that you're doing, you need to be very paranoid about it.
Great advice. Rey, what do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. Being paranoid is important. I would say an advice, something I do and I put it on my calendar is once a year. I do it once a year. It's around December timeframe because it's when work is a little slower. I do an inventory of my goal, my crown jewels, basically. Where are my assets, and then what am I doing to secure them? I just do an inventory of that and verifying whether I need to do anything more. It's just kind of like an audit. It's basically an audit of what of my environment. Have I locked down my phone? If somebody were to call and do a SIM swap, like you said, would they be able to do it? Have I set a password, secret phrase? Can I turn on two-factor authentication? I spoke with the CISO for T-Mobile, and it's like, hey, you need to be able to provide more education about security. And he says, you're absolutely right. And so a few months later, they start rolling out stuff, for this thing. So locking that out, when I was at JPM, for example, for 3 years, I didn't post on LinkedIn that I was working for JPM, just because I was so paranoid at the time. It's like, I'm working for one of the largest banks, in the US, if not the largest. And I'm gonna be a target for hackers, like you say, these fake recruiters. So I just didn't even post. Like, I didn't have anything on there until after I left. Then I posted. So trying to be paranoid, as Vlad said, is going to be important. Doing an inventory or once a year audit of your systems and seeing what else you can do to improve it in all parts of your life. Your Wi-Fi, your security, physical security. So, for example, people were starting to walk in through, they were surfing behind you, and it's like, okay, make sure your door is locked. Your Wi-Fi is secured. You got your antivirus is up to date. You're not logging on to the airport Wi-Fi. There's all those good hygiene best practices to do. So that's my recommendation.
Also amazing advice. And with that in mind, I want to wrap up. I want to say that, okay, if you're someone listening to this, take care of your security, both, personal security and also like the company you work with. I think both the speakers gave a lot of great advice. Thank you for that. With that in mind, bye-bye.
Thank you.